I want to talk about some of the social and historical changes that are happening in England during the early part of the 17th century. But we actually need to backtrack a little bit. So let's go back to 1588. Queen Elizabeth is the queen, and she has done an excellent job. She's very politically astute. She has centralized power around the monarchy. Because of the Reformation, she has also essentially taken control of religious authority as well. So it's a very centralized power system in England now. There's still, of course, a strong class division, and most of the power rests in the court. So in 1588 is the year that the English Navy defeated the Spanish Armada. This is supposed to be a huge, it was a huge victory for Queen Elizabeth, but it was supposed to also kind of solidify a British national identity and help quell some of the discontent that was happening in England at this time. Instead, what happened is that the conflict came to a head and started to rise up even more strongly. So the main points of conflict here are between those who want to maintain this traditional class authority and those who want change. And there were political battles between the House of Commons in particular and the Queen and her royal advisors, but there's also dissent on a local level. So part of this is tied to the Protestant reforms that have been going on. We've had the Reformation, there's been this understanding, Rome has in England essentially been overthrown. So there's an understanding that those who revolt can actually enact change and that there can be social change here. So how far should the Protestant reforms go and how much authority should a monarch have? So those are the main political debates that are happening. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth died and her Scottish cousin James I came to the throne. So this is a shift from the House of Tudor, Henry VIII, his family, Elizabeth is Henry VIII's daughter, to the House of Stuart. And so there's a change in royalty there. Now we've got James I. In 1605, there is a failed plot to overthrow the king called the Gunpowder Plot, in which Guy Fawkes, who was a Catholic extremist, and other Catholic extremists tried to blow up Parliament and the king. They failed, but due to that, there's a strong increase in anti-Catholic sentiment in England, which there already had been because of the Protestant Reformation. But it's getting worse. In 1608 and then again in 1620, bands of Puritan dissidents leave England because they don't like the fact that everybody is supposed to follow the Anglican Church, and some of them come to the New World and the Mayflower, and those are the ones we call pilgrims now. So there's that kind of dissent going on. In 1625, James I died, and his son Charles I to take over the throne. Now, Charles I is a much stronger and stricter ruler than his father. So if people thought James I was bad, people really thought Charles I was bad. He appeals to divine right. He favors a high Anglican style of worship. He's married to a Catholic, so that makes people upset. And he's sympathetic to Catholicism because of that family connection. So anybody who was already annoyed at the crown and the monarchy, it's getting worse. In 1642, a series of civil wars between the royalists and the Puritan dissidents and others rose in England. So it's not a constant period of civil war here, but there are a series of small wars and small rebellions that are happening during this time. The Puritan dissidents are primarily led by Oliver Cromwell, and their name for the rebels is the Roundheads. Once the Roundheads got control of what was going on, public entertainments were banned because they were seen as being immoral. So this would include dancing, plays, gambling. Theaters were closed until 1660, so that's really an end to this dramatic high point that we had with Shakespeare. That stops until 1660 when all of this is over. Previously, the court, the royal court, and the church had been the chief supporter of literature and arts. Neither institution had power during the civil wars. So the primary form of literature that we see during this time period shifts from creative plays and poetry to Puritan pamphlets and tracts. We get a dramatic increase in English newspapers. Between 1642 and 1649, it's estimated that about 170 weekly newspapers started. So there's a huge increase in newspapers. In 1645, Charles I was captured by these rebels, and he was later executed for treason in 1649. Oliver Cromwell, who was the leader of the Roundheads, then established England as a commonwealth. So this time period from 1649 to 1660 is not under the rule of a monarchy. Meanwhile, Charles II, who was the son of the executed Charles I, has fled England and becomes the King of Scotland. In 1653, Cromwell established England as a protectorate and named himself Lord Protector, which essentially makes him a dictator. So we're going from one system, the monarch of having sole control, moving to another where Cromwell, who is not a monarch, still essentially has sole control and tries to establish a new form of government in this way. He's actually pretty good at it, but he dies in 1658. His son Richard takes over. He is not very good at it, and he doesn't last very long. And by 1660, Charles II, who had been in Scotland, is restored to the throne of England, and so we're back to a monarchy system. It has been softened, however, so the Parliament has a lot more control, and it's a much weakened form of monarchy, but yet we still have this monarchy system.